Education, data, equity.
Reluctant project manager.
Gamer, nurse, developer.
Job interview today.
Hello everyone, my name is George. Around 2019, I started to pivot. My interest started to grow around birds. Not something I generally expected, but then into the pandemic, I dove really deep into it. And I came out of it a couple years later, joining a nonprofit focused on environmental work, Open Lands. I joined them to help run the Birds in My Neighborhood program to expose kids to birds all around their neighborhoods, and I had started sharing about my own progress in learning about birds through the now deceased Twitter platform, where that helped bring some attention to what I was doing. But through this work at Open Lands, I found several individuals who were interested in exploring how we might be able to set up these bird recorders on top of buildings. And so I met with folks from Cornell, including Benjamin Van Doren, who's here with us, and several other folks, including Duke and a couple of other local artists and individuals. And we set up a couple of stations thanks to devices from Benjamin when he was at Cornell then. We expanded through Duke, and since then we have been growing. And the project that I started at Open Lands has since spun off into its own endeavor now, City Birds, where it's a new nonprofit initiative. It's all still forming, so if you're interested in being a part of it, in participating, potentially being a board member as we file for 501c3, I'm all ears to talk about that. We are going to be joining Illinois Audubon as a fiscal sponsor to be able to raise some funds and continue the work that we're doing. But the City Birds, at its core, will be focused on four things in this, at least for the first 3 years while we work through a fiscal sponsorship. That will include the Chicago Bird Migration Monitoring Network that you'll hear about, in collaboration with the University of Illinois and Duke University and several other partners who are hosting us. There's also a device that was developed along this adventure. As I mentioned, we received some units, we started to expand, but in that time we started to figure out that we could build other units that were a little more specialized, and you'll hear a little bit more about that too. This is one component, this is part of the microphone. And something that I have learned is that there is a large community of people all throughout the world really, who are listening in to birds migrating at night. And I would like to continue developing this open source product. It's on GitHub right now to build a tool that can be used by the public, but can continue to be used by other universities or other researchers, whoever might be able to do it. Trying to bring it to a commercial grade product. I am now a member at MHub, and I'll be using that to leverage their facilities to help develop this with anybody who wants to participate. But as I mentioned, I've been a long-time listener of Shy Hack Night, and so starting today, and really piloted it a couple weeks ago, I'll be having a breakout group here every Tuesday, starting today. So if you want to come talk about birds, technology, there's a couple of things that I've explored along the way that I'd like to invite you all and anyone to participate. That includes things like supporting the Urban Birding Festival. We had the first one earlier this year. I've also been working with the Chicago Black-crowned night heron project to develop a better decoy. I have some photos that I can share. They were using great blue herons as their decoys that were colored. That's a bigger bird if you're not familiar with birds. And if you're not familiar with birds, I hope you get the bug at some point. This is the rendering of the microphone that we developed. And then also through more recently, I'm interested in exploring the eBird database. This was some data that I pulled from the Urban Birding Festival to see all the birds that were being seen throughout Chicago during that festival weekend. So if you're interested in building more apps, this is a shiny app. I really would like to explore other tools, maybe JavaScript tools to dig through the eBird API. So come hang out in the breakout group if you want to talk about birds and technology. And if you want to connect online, there's a mailing list at citybirds.info. That's also the handle for Instagram, and you can find me on Blue Sky as well. With that, I will pass it over to Benjamin, who will talk to you more, go more in depth into maybe some of these photos here, but here you can see some members from the collaborative team in a bigger map, and Benjamin will share a lot more.
It's nice to be virtually with you. Sorry I couldn't be there in person, and sorry that's led to some technical difficulties, but I'm excited to share with you my work and the work of George and many others on bird migration in Chicago and how that could, we think, be an exciting topic for Sci-Hack Night. So I'm from the University of Illinois. I'm an assistant professor down here in Urbana-Champaign, Champaign-Urbana. And you obviously just heard from George. So I won't introduce him, but I want to tell you a little bit about bird migration in the context of Chicago and some of the tech that we're using to monitor bird migration. And hopefully I can speed through my presentation at the right slides and make things nice and efficient. So there are about 11,000 bird species in the world. These are just a few of them that are migratory birds we have in North America. About 20% of all bird species are migratory. But in North America, we live in a temperate climate, and that means it gets cold in the winters, as we're now experiencing as it gets later into fall. And so many of those birds that eat insects, for example, they need to leave in the winter, otherwise they won't be able to find any food. So they're migratory. About 70% of our North American bird species. And actually the dominant mode of migration for these migratory birds is to fly at night. So they're migrating at night, unseen by us largely. And there are 4 billion of these songbirds mostly that are migrating in and out of North America each spring and fall. So now in mid-November, the fall migration is tapering off. Most of those birds have already passed through and are well on their way, if not already in places like Mexico and Peru and Argentina, or in places like Florida, Texas, the Gulf Coast, depends on the species and how far they go. Let's skip over this slide. In Chicago, we're a city with lots of birds, big urban areas, lots of lighting. And for migratory birds, cities are places that are really important. Cities are often on important migratory flyways like Chicago is. They're important places for birds to be able to rest and refuel. They're also places that pose risks for birds, and light pollution, collisions from windows, for example. These are just a couple of the risks. And if we have time, I want to talk about maybe how we can help birds too. But highlighting Chicago as an important place for migratory birds, we can use radar to monitor the flow of migratory birds. And we find that over 100 million birds pass through the Chicago area in the spring, and nearly 200,000, or between 150 and 200,000, 150 and 200 million in the fall. So this is a huge passage point for migratory birds. And citizen scientists on eBird, which is a data repository, a website that you can submit your sightings on, it's also an app, have seen over 400 species just in Cook County alone. And as of when I took the screenshot in September, nearly 300 species this year alone. So imagine 300 different species of birds all in Cook County this year alone. Pretty incredible. So when we think about habitat for birds and what they need, then we might think of a place like Montrose Point, or a place with actual green habitat, fields and trees and the like, and maybe some coastline. But migratory birds spend a lot of time in the air as well. And so it's really important to think about how they are using this airspace, which is a place that is influenced by humans, influenced by our vehicles, our lights, our sounds, all sorts of things that can disrupt migratory birds. So some of the work that we're doing in Chicago involves trying to better understand how birds are using the airspace and the risks that they face on the ground, and how those two are connected and what we can do about it. We have a lot of partners in this effort. George and City Birds is a major partner. I'm at University of Illinois, and a lot of the logos you see here are organizations that have helped us either directly through monitoring, through organizational efforts. And so I want to talk about this network that George probably mentioned, although I couldn't hear, of course. This is a network that I saw it on his slide anyway. This is a network of recording devices, both acoustic and video devices that we have in the city right now that are capturing the sounds and the sights of birds migrating at night. The thermal cameras are able to capture birds moving overhead at night when we can't see them visually, of course. And our microphones are really exciting because migratory birds are, although we can't see them passing over except through a thermal camera or maybe a radar, they give vocalizations, calls as they fly overhead. And these are just short snippets, short little chirps and buzzes. And it turns out that they are identifiable to species if we have enough information, we can identify them to species. And so for the first time, we're capturing across the city in essentially real time these recordings and videos of birds that we're going to be putting together or already are putting together to paint a picture of how different species are moving through this built and natural environment that is Chicago. And it's all really exciting. So just a snapshot of this. Data comes in from, for example, I'll start with our acoustic sensors. Data comes in to devices that many of them are running Raspberry Pis, and we upload the data to the cloud, in this case, Amazon Web Services. And we run a machine learning model that we've developed to automate the process of detecting and identifying these calls. And then we can plot the data. Right now, you can go on chicagobirdmigration.net and see our dashboard. The circles on the left are the sites, and the size of the circle is the number of calls for a particular species, in this case, the Swainson's thrush, which is, I think it's Swainson's thrush. Anyway, it's a thrush, one of the top 2 thrush species. And this species is one that's really hard to detect in the daytime. But at night, they're very vocal, and we can see in September, the first half of September, some really big nights where, okay, this is definitely a Swainson's thrush because there are so many of them. It's our most commonly detected migrant. And one night had nearly 60,000 detections of this one species through the city. So we're able to get this granular fine data about bird movements through the city in a way that we haven't been able to previously. Here's a snapshot of another species at a particular location. So we have a microphone on top of the Peggy Notebart Nature Museum. And so this is the data just from that one site. So we can really drill down to site-specific information. And we can also learn about species of conservation concern that are actually really hard to detect otherwise. This is a species, the upland sandpiper, that has declined by nearly 10% per year, according to the Bird Conservation Network in Chicagoland and their compiled data. And only one of these individuals, one of the species has been detected this fall via bird watchers on the ground and submitted to the eBird database. But we are able to record sometimes dozens of them flying over the city on just single nights. So we're able to capture this information about species that are otherwise really hard to detect, and we would have no idea this grassland specialist is using the airspace over Chicago. So that's really exciting as well. So I mentioned the data come to AWS, to Amazon. We run our machine learning model on it, and then we can produce these nice dashboard visualizations. But behind the scenes, we have all of this machine learning and audio detection going on. This is a snapshot of our dashboard that is kind of the behind the scenes, sorry, our data management software, which is the behind the scenes of the dashboard. And the boxes, images on the screen are the spectrograms, the visual representations of sound of the upland sandpiper call. So if you haven't seen a spectrogram before, just to orient you, the x-axis is time, and the y-axis is frequency. So higher pitched sound will be further up on the y-axis, and the lower pitch sound on further down on the y-axis. So I won't try to imitate or play this play this sound because I didn't hook up the sound properly. But we can use the software to manage hundreds of thousands, if not millions of detections we recorded. But we had over 1.2 million detections from our network this fall alone. So there's a lot of data to go through, and this is a management system we've designed to do that. Other approaches that we're using to monitor migration in Chicago include Doppler radar. I mentioned radar in passing earlier, and radar can give us a really big picture of bird migration. The radars we're using are actually the same radars that the National Weather Service uses to monitor storms and tornadoes and rain and snow and all that, and the same data that you could get on a weather app on your phone. But the meteorologists actually filter out all of the non-precipitation stuff before you see any of that. And actually, there's so much data about stuff in the atmosphere that includes biological stuff that is just filtered out at the source, essentially, or a little bit after the source. So if we wanted to get that information, we have to go all the way to the source. Thankfully, the data are freely available by the government, and we can use that information to track bird migration. What are we seeing here? Well, birds take off in their nocturnal migrations right after sunset, and there's a short period of time where they're just starting to take off, and the radar is picking them up, and you can see, based on where they're distributed, you can see actually the habitats that they had spent the day in before they launched off in nocturnal migration. So on the right is an image of the green spaces in I think mostly Cook County, and on the left is a corresponding radar image for a night of migration, and we can see with those orange rectangles that I've drawn that the darkest green colors on the radar image, which represent the most birds, are actually the places right above green spaces in Chicago. So we can see here in this image that lots of birds had spent the day in green spaces in Chicago and are now taking off in nocturnal migration. So we can use radar to understand how birds are using the atmosphere above Chicago. I mentioned thermal cameras. So this is a video from a thermal camera with some pretty basic tracking software. You'll see these green boxes move across the screen. We have a camera pointed upwards, and we can actually use that to see the migrating birds passing overhead as they are flying over the camera. So I'm not sure. I just grabbed this video before the talk, and I'm not sure when the next bird flies through, but hopefully you caught the first couple of birds passing over the camera, and maybe I'll wait for one more as I explain this. So we have these cameras across at 6 sites across the city, pairs of cameras. And one thing we don't know is really how birds behave in flight over the city. So things like light pollution can influence how birds may be, it may disorient birds, for example. They might be using certain corridors or pathways that we can't really see on the radar image. And thermal imagery is just one more way that we can, there's one faint bird that was just picked up. Thermal imagery is one more way that we can monitor bird migration above Chicago. And so this is still a work in progress, the thermal imagery part, so I don't have anything polished to share with you, but happy to talk about it more. Maybe you can talk to George if the audio doesn't end up working. So that's a sneak peek at thermal data. I'll try to speed through this part of the talk, which is less tech focused. So cities, I mentioned light pollution. Cities draw in birds because light is attractive to birds at night, kind of like moths are attracted to candles or light bulbs at our houses. So cities draw in birds through light pollution, and so that makes cities both an important place for birds because they get drawn in, and it's really important to have good habitat there, but also dangerous because cities are places with lots of hazards. So I'm gonna skip over a little section on light pollution, but if you take my word for light pollution being an issue, one that can lead to bird collisions, that's the message that I wanted to leave you with. Um, before I end here, I want to also share with you some work that we've done on forecasting bird migration, which has a nice tech focus as well. So if we want to understand not only when birds are going to be in cities to guide conservation efforts, but also if you're a bird watcher and you want to know when to see birds in your area, forecasting bird migration is a something that is an exciting proposition. And just a few years ago, migration forecasts did not exist at all. And we used in making migration forecasts, we used this network of weather radars. So here is of course the US, and the white dots, if you can make them out, are each of the 143 weather radars in the US. And the green and blue circles around each of those white dots is the signatures of migrating birds that have taken off in nocturnal migration on a very heavy night of migration. And they're mostly in the eastern US because on this night, the weather conditions were favorable for migration in the east. And so these are those migrating birds, their signatures. So if we want to predict when birds are going to be actually using the airspace over our heads as we sleep, we have to connect data on bird migration to weather variables, to weather data, because birds pay really close attention to the weather. Any bird watcher will tell you that in the fall when winds are from the north, which is a favorable wind for birds that want to head south, you'll get lots of birds migrating. You'll see lots of new birds at your local park the next morning. But if winds are from the south, which is a headwind for those birds, they'll just sit tight and wait for conditions to improve. And so you won't get much bird migration. So we can combine lots of data on bird migration from the weather radar network with information on precipitation and temperature and air pressure and location and all of that. We can put them together into a statistical modeling framework. In this case, a machine learning approach that combines over 20 years of radar data with this weather information to produce a prediction based on the weather of how many birds are going to be migrating. So if we can learn how birds respond to weather, we can make a forecast based on the weather forecast for how many birds we expect to be migrating given that weather prediction. And that's a migration forecast. During the migration season, which we have a few more days on our official migration season, which goes until November 15th. If you log on to birdcast.info, you can see our live forecasts and analysis. And this is a forecast image from spring 2023. And the warmer colors indicate areas where lots of birds are predicted to be migrating across the United States. And we predicted about 500 million birds to be aloft at one point on a single night. So tons and tons of birds that we're capturing here. And we can also use this information to make an assessment or a prediction about when and where birds will be most at risk of colliding with buildings or being drawn in by light pollution. And so we can put out an advisory at any given location for when we would like people to turn off their lights to protect birds on a given night. So Birdcast also has a live migration dashboard that is essentially a feed from the weather radar. It's processed through some algorithms to estimate bird migration intensities. And if you log on to Birdcast and check this out during the migration season, you can see just how intense this phenomenon is. This is the biggest night of the year this past fall, the night of September 20th, where nearly 9 million estimated birds passed over Cook County alone. So that's pretty incredible. Okay, so this slide I want to highlight that light pollution poses a risk for birds. Cities can be dangerous places, but there is also a lot of interest in taking action to protect birds. And Illinois actually passed a Bird Safe Buildings Act in 2021, a few years ago, which puts it ahead of the curve of many other states. And just this summer, The McCormick Place Convention Center in downtown Chicago, a place that has been um, the source of a lot of bird deaths. A lot of birds have collided with those windows. They treated their windows with um, a bird safe film, essentially. It's a adhesive film. If you can make out these white dots in the photographs here, those are meant to break up the reflection of the glass. And anecdotally, or preliminarily, is from what I hear, it's made a big difference. So there are actions that we can take, like treating windows to help protect birds from collisions. So overall, cities are important and can be dangerous places for birds, but through research and outreach and action, we can definitely make them safer for birds. Alongside treating windows, we can do things like collect citizen science data, avoid pesticides, plant native plants, and use technology to help learn about and come up with creative solutions. So I'm really excited to see what the discussion may bring.
Yeah, I guess to either of you, how do you verify like the accuracy of the machine learning model? Like, what are the steps to make sure that, like, if you're making a prediction, you're saying like 90% of the birds are this, how do you know it's not just like the model thinks every bird is this bird?
So, question about how to verify the accuracy of the machine learning algorithm. So we had a couple. I just blazed through that. So we had a couple machine learning algorithms. One that I'll talk first about the acoustic one. So our machine learning model that I mentioned to identify these vocalizations definitely is not perfect. And so it's important for us to include a human in the loop of this process. So on the dashboard that you saw, those were preliminary detections that the model made. But we have a number of steps where we validate those detections with experts, myself or my students. We tune our model thresholds. So the model gives us a probability score, essentially, of how confident a confidence score for every given detection. And so we can tune those thresholds using validation data from people to find the optimal threshold based on how tolerant we want to be of mistakes, or how stringent we want to be about avoiding mistakes. So definitely requires some human oversight. And happy to dig into that further, but maybe I'll move on to the radar algorithm. So we also had an algorithm for the forecasting, and that we also had a validation data set from weather radar measures of bird migration that we didn't include in our training data set. So we can use that to validate. But certainly for the acoustic data, which I suspect the question is mostly about, it's definitely essential to have a human kind of oversee the process, let's say.
Just to expand on that a little bit, so how one becomes an expert in nocturnal flight calls. Nocturnal flight call recording has been around since, I think it's around the 60s. People using magnetic tapes, hay bells, and big recorders out in fields. And so there has been a lot of work to record birds, and then other efforts to then identify who is making those calls. So there are repositories online, such as nocturnalflightcalls.com. And before that, oldbird.org. Those are online repositories that have spectrograms of the nocturnal flight calls, and they classify them all. So when you are learning about how to learn those and verify those results, those are two resources where you can compare all the acoustical properties of them.
A question in the back? Yeah.
Yeah, for the vocalization model, why not just use the Merlin model?
I'll let him start.
All right, Merlin, M-E-R-L-I-N.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is going to be a wonky answer, you know.
Yeah, so the question about why not the Merlin model. So great question. So our model, which we call Nighthawk, it's kind of a play on words because of Merlin, actually. Our model grew out of an initial version of the Merlin model. I used to work at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology before I started this position at Illinois. And so actually it's very similar, a very similar approach to the Merlin model. We diverged from Merlin for a couple of reasons. One being that Merlin wasn't trained specifically for this nocturnal migration monitoring context. And so there were a couple of design decisions that we wanted to do differently. One related to the amount of audio that the model processes. So Merlin actually takes 3 seconds of audio at a time. And these vocalizations that we're processing are 50 to 150 milliseconds long. So we wanted to shrink that time window. And also we needed to take into account a greater amount of uncertainty, identification uncertainty in these really short vocalizations. So sometimes we can't identify them to species, but we can say that a vocalization is one of a few species or belongs to, say, a warbler or the thrush family or something like that. With Merlin, that is built only to classify vocalizations put it in species buckets at the species level. And so essentially, if you can't get a vocalization down to the species level, you can't really do anything with it in the way the Merlin model is designed. So we also expanded that to include a kind of a taxonomic hierarchy. So the model can make predictions at the species level, but also predictions at broader taxonomic classes, like the family level, for example, say something is a thrush or a sparrow or a warbler. And the third thing is the training data set. The Merlin model is trained on a lot of data, but we wanted to customize to specifically data coming out of our acoustic monitoring devices for a number of reasons. So, but yes, we're essentially kind of an offshoot of Merlin in some ways.
What does the box do?
I mentioned oldbird.org. Oldbird is the name of the previous recorders or systems. So we could use any recorder, really, and actually, if I may, for bioacoustic research, this is a pretty broad standard. This is a Song Meter Mini. It's a passive acoustic recording unit, or at least that's what it's referred to. Inside, it's a small microcomputer in there. It's got an SD card, battery. Normally we use lithium-ion batteries, but this also has AA battery holders. And essentially there's a microphone here, records that in here. We take it into 15-minute increments, and then we process it through Nighthawk that you mentioned. This, with its microphone, would record just general audio around here. The Oldbird, which came in buckets when I first met Benjamin, we had a lot of failures with the buckets. They are essentially Home Depot buckets with some acrylic pieces and a microphone element inside, and then some other electronics to power that microphone element. It originally came from a hearing aid. And inside was a prism to direct the sound from an omnidirectional microphone. And we've taken the same thing. So there are other parts. This is a 3-part design, really. But this is designed to go on top of the recorder. And this came from our Mudawin unit, National Tallgrass Prairie, that's just southwest of here. But this here is a passive horn amplifier that also directs the sound a little bit. So their station, usually, for these versions, they go in a cinder block. For the ones I use with Benjamin, they are Raspberry Pi units with the same microphones attached. And the idea is that it encompasses or directs the sound recordings to come in. It also amplifies a lot of it while canceling out. To some extent, noise is out here. And so, if you have any experience in industrial design, we're looking for ways to continually improve the design and capabilities, like we're using this acoustic foam, but certainly we could use some other design elements. But yes, there is another part here. Then we put plastic film to waterproof it, but there are other materials that we can use. And then on top of that, we put a grill and a mesh, and that protects it from hail, or say if a bird were to come and perch on it with its feet, it would pierce the plastic. So we have a cover, and then underneath we seal it as well to sit it on top of the cinder block. In some cases, we've had animals go in, so we want this sealed. Animals being like ants, really, but we did have a raccoon like rip through it. At one site, we had a horse go at it. So this is the portion that I brought here is the amplifier. It gives directionality and amplifies the sound, improving our collection of the nocturnal flight calls.
And how many of these do you have installed?
We have 36 of them right now installed. Well, we have 36 sites. Some sites have multiple units. Some of these archival units, as we call them, and then other online connected devices that we build with the University of Illinois. Those online, those internet-enabled ones stream the data, and you can see information coming in live through that website, chicagobirdmigration.net. And then, as mentioned, 5 of those stations have those cameras, and it's actually 2 cameras. It's stereo imagery that is able to capture birds, and that way we're able to quantify how many. You saw the numbers going up on those squares, but we're also able to measure height because of it. We couldn't do it with just one, but we can measure height, velocity, and direction. 36 of these. Our highest one is on top of the Willis Tower. I get to go up there every once in a while to go check on it. We also have them on top of the museums, including Adler, MSI, SAIC, and then in some forest preserves, including DuPage. I heard some suburban birding out there. I'm not sure which direction you're coming from. And then we're spread out in the suburbs as well. And then we also have some local residents who have contributed their backyard to let us record there.
What is the function of the Raspberry Pi devices? How do those work into the system?
Yeah, so I mentioned this recorder here that records onto an SD card from that microphone. The Raspberry Pi, a lot of that code is developed by, Benjamin can tell you who that is again, but the function of the Raspberry Pi is to have a timer that is set to record the audio coming in from a microphone. There's a sound card, a USB sound card attached to it. And it essentially is a schedule of when to set these recordings. And I mentioned we record them in 15-minute chunks. And then these Raspberry Pis are powered over Ethernet at the moment. So that feeds us directly into the internet and allows us to upload into the university's AWS account for processing of that. In the future, hopefully we can process some of that on board, but as you heard, there's still a lot of training going into the model. So for that reason, we're sending that all up right now.
Sure. So the software on the Raspberry Pi, let's see. So we are using, for recording the audio, we are using software that is open source software developed by a developer named Harold Mills, who makes a program called Vesper. It's software designed for acoustic monitoring, and most of Vesper is a platform for organizing audio, but he also built in a recorder recently. And so we're using this recorder aspect of Vesper, which allows us to schedule recordings relative to sunrise and sunset, so we can program it to start and stop at certain times, and we can have it automatically upload the audio to Amazon S3, which is a cloud storage, essentially. So there's nothing too complicated running on the Raspberry Pis at the moment. It's essentially this recorder on a timer to record audio. We record 15-minute files, and then we push those 15 files containing 15 minutes of audio to the cloud, where then our cloud processing pipeline takes over. We also have a little bit more, some more code on the Raspberry Pis to keep things running smoothly, like restarting it every now and then, to restarting it regularly, and a couple other things that I'm probably forgetting to keep things synced. But it's really fairly simple software, just operating as a recorder. There's a potential in the future to try to run our machine learning model, our Nighthawk audio model, directly on the devices in an edge computing kind of way. And I think we'll probably do that in the future. At the moment, though, we have the bandwidth, the internet bandwidth, and the storage to just save all of the audio. And the reason I like saving all of the audio and not only receiving the snippets from the device is because then as we improve the model, we have access to the raw data. We don't throw out the raw data. So as a scientist, I have trouble throwing out raw data. So I like to keep all the data. But in the future, essentially, especially as we expand and the data we're handling gets large enough that saving everything becomes prohibitively expensive, I imagine we'll probably move to a more edge computing kind of strategy where we're only sending to the cloud audio snippets that we think are interesting.
And the only other thing to add on that, some of the other fail safes that we added as far as code on the Pi, that restarting is some of these locations don't have the best internet, so we have schedules to read through and see if there was any failed data or data that failed to upload, so we reattempt to upload and ensure that we have as much of that as possible.
Is any of the data that you collect being published back to eBird, or if not, do you intend to do that in the future?
That's a great question. Many, and maybe Benjamin has some other ideas, some of the other local bird institutions do have like backlogs of bird records in the area and anywhere really. I'm not sure that eBird is the best place for a lot of that information, but I'm sure that in the future there will be some form of collaboration into understanding how birds are moving through like the upland sandpiper, as Benjamin mentioned. There were very few, one in Cook, more further out. So not many upland sandpiper sightings, but we do have records of them passing through. And I'm not sure how that is going to connect with eBird repositories or iNaturalist, but maybe in the future that might be something to explore.
Question about eBird. So at the moment, the data that we are, so eBird is a repository for its core observations of bird sightings, but they also support a protocol where you can submit data from acoustic recordings, like a nocturnal migration recording, like we're doing. We haven't submitted the data yet back to eBird. The reason, in part, is because of the scale and the validation required, and I don't want to be uploading recordings, especially uploading recordings that I'm not 100% confident about. So at the moment, our data aren't sent to eBird. But it's a great question because we definitely should do that at a point. That should be part of the life cycle of our project, where once we have kind of a confirmed, validated set of recordings and observations, that we should definitely archive them in the eBird database, which is an excellent database and extremely valuable for science. So this fall was the first fall that we had this network of Raspberry Pi based devices in Chicago, and it's going to take us a little while to get wrangle the data in a place where we would be happy with archiving it in eBird, but I think we'll definitely get there at some point. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't know that side of eBird, so that was good to hear as well.
In the meantime, you can see it on our dashboard on our website. You can see the raw detections, the preliminary detections, at least.
I mean, I guess that's kind of any final thoughts?
Yeah, I had another thought on what he said, but I have now forgotten what that was now. But in any case, as I mentioned.
Okay, well, thanks so much for having me. And I'm sure George will be more than happy to answer anything live in person as well. So, thank you.
I'll just close off by saying, so I'll be here for breakout groups, and if you want to come and chat, and I'll be here in concurrent meetings as well and virtually. And potentially on mHub, we might have space to hold events as well, depending on scheduling. But also, if you want to get involved with some bird walks, if you haven't ever gotten on a bird walk, some of our main focus areas will include the Loop. The Loop is a great place to go birding. The other focus area, and part of that focus is actually we want to engage the shy Hacknight-like community to build cool stuff with. So we'd like to connect with you and invite you to come birding with us. Over in the Loop, some of my favorite places include Millennium Park, and then just south of that, by the head of state statue along the Van Buren Metro line. That's probably my favorite little spot that's off the beaten track here. But then we'll also have bird walks throughout the rest of the city as well, particularly in some underserved community to bring back and connect from Loop to those communities that are often underbirded, as it's referred to within the birding community, but also with individuals that want to participate in this and that don't generally have access to these kind of tools. Thank you all, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for bearing with us.
Yes. Sorry about that.